Hello friends, you're on the Ruslan Bailov channel, and today, on October 8, 2025, we'll take a detailed look at everything happening on the Ukrainian front. The past 24 hours brought not just updates, but a series of key events showing that the front has shifted again. On several axes at once, we see steady advances by Russian forces, the breakdown of Ukrainian defensive lines, and, most importantly, a change in operational tempo. Let's go through everything in order, moving from south to north, as is customary on operational maps. Zaporizhzhia front, the Novohrihorivka line, and the Yanchel River developments here are moving rapidly. Russian troops continue to build on their gains as part of the Zaporizhzhia offensive, and this is exactly where some of today's most telling footage came from. The map of the front has changed before our eyes. If on October 7th fighting was still underway for Novovasilivske, then by the morning of October 8th, there was confirmation of full control over Novohrihorivka, a village long considered one of the Ukrainian defense's strongpoints. As recently as October 6th, Russian units were just a few hundred meters from these positions. In 48 hours, the front moved by kilometers, and we are no longer talking about a local action, but about the sequential rupture of an entire fortified area. Footage from objective control, published by the Vostok grouping, shows the full course of the operation. Heavy airstrikes, artillery preparation, FPV drone work, and then assault infantry clearing every house and every yard. In the final fragments, soldiers raise Russian flags in different parts of the village. These images have become a symbol that the so-called grey zone here no longer exists. Novohrihorivka has passed under full control of the Russian army. Militarily, this means the end of the fighting for the buffer between the Uspenivka-Poltavka fortified area and the Mokrye Yali River. The enemy's key defensive nodes now are Poltavka, Okhotnichye, Novonikolaevka, and Uspenovka, and the offensive continues on all these lines. New adjustments to the maps appear daily. Given the current pace, one can assume that within the next 2 or 3 days, Russian units will clear Novonikolaevka, finally closing the arc along the Yanchel waterline. Crossing this river, presumably north of Okhotnichye, would be the next logical step. By consolidating along the tree line, the Russian army would be able to split the Ukrainian defensive belt in two, which in turn would threaten the entire system of fortifications in this area. At the same time, fierce fighting continues for Poltavka. Ukrainian units, despite losses, keep resisting. However, even pro-Ukrainian sources acknowledge that the tempo of the Russian advance is not decreasing. Every day brings visual confirmation of artillery, aviation, and drone strikes, as well as data on enemy equipment losses. Slightly to the north, activity has intensified around Alexeyevka. Today there was noted Russian progress in the southern part of the settlement. It is noteworthy that, for the first time, the front line was adjusted by Ukrainian sources themselves, acknowledging the presence of Russian soldiers. Pro-Ukrainian cartographers, trying to account for this, referred to sightings of 4 servicemen, but even that was enough to force changes on their own maps. Afterwards, both neutral and pro-Russian analysts made the same corrections. Extremely heavy street fighting is now underway in Alexeyevka. The Ukrainian side is attempting to bring in reinforcements and armor, but almost all columns approaching the line of contact are destroyed by FPV drone operators before they even enter the settlement. Thus, the offensive on this sector is a gradual but steady squeezing of the enemy from its positions. Pokrovsk direction, the key to the collapse of the Ukrainian defense, moving on to the Pokrovsk front, where the Russian army appears to be conducting a general offensive toward the southern and central districts of Pokrovsk. But today the focus is farther north, on the Pokrovska mine area near the settlement of Udakne. It is here that the Ukrainian defense has visibly cracked. The map has shifted again. Over the past 24 hours, there has been documented Russian advance, confirmed even by Ukrainian video materials. The footage shows Ukrainian FPV drones striking Russian assault troops operating on the mine's grounds. This means Russian units are already inside the facility. Most likely they are consolidating now, with close quarters fighting underway. If the mine fully comes under Russian control, the troops will gain operational space to the north, towards Sahivka and the M30 highway, considered one of the most important supply arteries for the entire Ukrainian grouping on this axis. Losing control of the highway would put the entire Pokrovsk front at risk of encirclement. Experts increasingly speak of a forming cauldron that could trap Ukrainian units holding the city's central districts. Meanwhile, there are growing signs that the Ukrainian side is preparing to withdraw. Even Kiev-loyal channels report that the most combat-ready units are being pulled off the first line, replaced by mobilized troops effectively assigned to a covering role. This indirectly confirms that the command is trying to buy time to regroup and straighten the front farther north. Changes are also occurring within the agglomeration itself. Neutral and Ukrainian mapping services have added new shaded areas. Russian gains are marked in the southeastern part of Pokrovsk, around the central citadel, and south of the railway station. However, there is still no official video confirmation, so these data remain preliminary. Much of the city is still considered a grey zone or remains under Ukrainian control, but the trend is clear. The front line is gradually pushing deeper in. Notably, activity has intensified at the breakthrough point. The Russian army has re-established control over Zapovednoye and Pankovka, and has also entered the southern part of Vladimirovka. All of these settlements were lost in the summer during Ukrainian counterattacks. Now, after the destruction of bridges over the Kryvyi Torets and Kazenyi Torets rivers, Ukrainian logistics on this sector have essentially collapsed. Without bridges, crossings, and supply routes, holding the defense becomes impossible. According to open sources, Russian units have also brought the Sofiyivka-Novopavlovka road under control, which has effectively sealed the Ukrainian grouping in the Shakivsky pocket. Cut off from supply, enemy units are forced to abandon their positions, while the Russian army, on the contrary, is increasing pressure along the entire line, from Vezyoloye and Zolotoy Kolodets to Hruskaya and Novonikolayevka. The objective is obvious: to reclaim everything lost in August and September and to pivot the front into a favorable posture ahead of the winter phase of fighting. Siversk axis, preparing for urban combat, now to Siversk. The main line of combat here runs along the railway tracks from Vyemka and Pereyezdnoye toward the city. Ukrainian sources published footage of strikes on Russian positions near a large company-level strongpoint that several years ago had been turned into a full-fledged fortress. Judging by reports from both sides, this fortified area is already under Russian control. Seizing this site opens the way farther northwest to the next defensive node, which lies inside Siversk's urban area. This means the front has come right up to the city. Any subsequent offensive action will, in effect, mark the start of street fighting for Siversk's southern districts. Analysts note that Ukrainian forces are preparing defenses and mining the approaches. However, amid a general shortage of reserves, holding this sector for long will be extremely difficult. Lyman sector, a new pocket in the making. On the Lyman direction, the situation remains tense. Fighting is ongoing simultaneously in several villages: Drobyshevo, Stavki, Novoselivka, and Yampol. Each of these localities has effectively become a line of contact. Drone footage shows Yampol engulfed in flames, smoke over ruined houses, warehouses on fire, and a constant exchange of artillery strikes. The Russian army is attacking from multiple directions at once, gradually straightening the front line. Slightly to the north, there is reported progress toward the 0526 road junction leading to Lyman, as well as movement along the highway from Zareknoye. Experts close to the front say the Ukrainian command is concentrating remaining forces in this area, creating a dense network of strongpoints outside Lyman's city limits. The likely plan is to establish a new defensive line to prevent the city's fall in a potential third battle for Lyman. However, a frontal assault is unlikely. As analysts note, the Russian army prefers flanking moves through wooded areas on the southeast and northwest to take the enemy in a semicircle and gradually push them out. Kupiansk direction, slow but steady, and finally Kupiansk. For the first time in a long while, objective control footage has appeared confirming Russian advances in the western and northwestern parts of the city. The videos show Ukrainian drones attempting to strike Russian assault positions among ruined buildings. Yet the very presence of Russian troops there speaks for itself. The advance is underway. Following these releases, even neutral and Ukrainian cartographers adjusted their maps, marking improved Russian positions. The tempo here is moderate but stable, The front moves forward slowly, without setbacks, under constant pressure. If the current dynamics hold, the northwestern, western, and southwestern districts of Kupiansk could be fully cleared within the next 2 to 3 weeks. That would set conditions for pushing to the next line, the river and the city's industrial zones, where Ukrainian units are still trying to hold. So, to sum up, the front is moving. In the south, near Zaporizhzhia, the Ukrainian defense is being systematically torn apart. On the Pokrovsk axis, a cauldron is forming. Near Siversk and Lyman, the front is nearing the urban edge, and around Kupiansk, the Russian army is consolidating a slow but inexorable success. Each axis matters on its own, and together they show one thing: the campaign's tempo has shifted. Now turning briefly to the political scene. Warsaw, Riga, and Tallinn reacted with anger to former German Chancellor Angela Merkel's recent comments on the roots of the current conflict. In her remarks, Merkel stated that the position taken by Poland and the Baltic states back in 2021 effectively destroyed any chance for the European Union to reach a compromise with Russia, indirectly paving the way to the present war. Her statement set off a wave of indignation across Eastern Europe. In Estonia, Foreign Minister Margus Tsahkna called her accusations brazen and utterly false, insisting that the true cause of the conflict lay in Russia's imperial ambitions. Similar rhetoric poured in from Riga, Vilnius, and Warsaw. What united them was outrage and, at the same time, a note of insecurity. Merkel had touched a raw nerve, exposing how Eastern Europe's maximalist posture in 2021 was encouraged and rewarded, but also how it failed. Back in 2022, Poland and the Baltic states briefly enjoyed their political golden hour. Encouraged by Washington, they lectured the larger EU members on being too soft toward Moscow, while Western European leaders, including Berlin and Paris, made gestures of repentance, admitting they had underestimated Eastern warnings. Now that energy and economic realities have caught up with Europe, the political climate has shifted, and Merkel's comments bring that reckoning into the open. Poland, of course, has always been a special case. Its Russophobia runs deep and often turns hysterical. But at the time, the ruling Law and Justice Party had strained relations with Brussels, so Warsaw was never fully embraced as a model. The Baltic states, on the other hand, were rewarded handsomely. Within the current European Commission, key strategic portfolios are held by Baltic officials. Valdis Dombrovskis of Latvia oversees economic policy. Andrius Kubilius of Lithuania deals with defense and security, and Kaja Kallas of Estonia, one of the loudest anti-Russian voices, handles foreign affairs. Meanwhile, representatives from more cautious states, like Hungary, are sidelined to non-critical roles. As a result, Europe's economy is now partly steered by those who advocate a total trade embargo against one of its largest former markets. Its defense policy is shaped by people warning daily of a coming Russian invasion of NATO, and its diplomacy is headed by a figure openly dismissive of any talks with Moscow. The consequences are visible: rising costs, fragmented politics, and fatigue across EU societies. Even among European elites, there is growing awareness that the Baltic-Polish model of policy has run its course. Merkel's statement reflects that fatigue. Despite being retired, she still represents the voice of a more moderate establishment, one that once commanded over 3/4 of German public trust. By contrast, the current Chancellor and CDU leader Friedrich Merz, Merkel's longtime rival, enjoys barely 1/4 of that support. Merkel criticizes Merz's approach of complete refusal to negotiate with Moscow, warning that this line, supported by the Baltic states and Poland, reduces Europe's strategic flexibility and locks it into a long, costly standoff. Meanwhile, Eastern European politicians like Kubilius fuel alarmism. Quoting unnamed German intelligence data, he claims that Russia is already discussing aggression scenarios against NATO, a statement that Merz himself later echoed when justifying new military spending. Whether Kubilius cited Merz's words or Merz borrowed his rhetoric remains unclear, but both reinforce the same fear narrative, useful for budgets and headlines, less so for peace. Merkel, speaking mainly to a domestic audience, used the episode to make a broader point: that Europe's diplomacy collapsed not by chance, but because voices calling for dialogue were silenced in favor of confrontation. She argued that had the 2021 EU-Russia talks not been blocked by the anti-Moscow coalition of Poland and the Baltics, a diplomatic channel might have survived, preventing the conflict from escalating in 2022. Her critics insist she overestimates Europe's ability to influence the course of events, that by that time Washington and London were already steering policy, and Kiev, caught between two masters, naturally followed the Anglo-American line. Still, Merkel's intervention matters. It reopens the debate about who actually sets EU foreign policy and whose emotions and complexes define its tone. The Baltic states, driven by historical resentment and dependence on the US, have amplified the anti-Russian line beyond strategic necessity. Poland, motivated by its own sense of grievance, did the same. As Merkel implies, this combination has turned the EU from an independent pole of power into a hostage of its eastern fringe. Her message is not a call to forgive or forget, but to return to diplomacy and realism. Europe, she suggests, cannot rebuild its prosperity on endless confrontation. If fear and resentment continue to dictate decisions, the continent will keep paying an ever-rising price for someone else's agenda. Thank you for watching. You've been on the Ruslan Belov channel. Subscribe, hit like and share this video. More updates, more facts ahead, and, as always, an objective look at the front.